Tonight, we're continuing in our Lenten series, Deserts, and we have a lot to talk about tonight, so we're just going to jump right in. Tonight, we're talking about humility. Not the kind you post about, not the humble brag version that starts with, I don't normally do this, but I mean actual humility. The kind that walks quietly and lowers itself on purpose, tells the truth, all while not needing applause, to know that it's doing the right thing. Humility is not just a character trait that some of us have and others don't. According to Jesus, and actually according to the desert fathers and mothers that we've been looking at in this series, humility is actually the pathway through suffering and trials, through desert seasons. It's not a side virtue, it is the road. It's how we walk through the desert without losing our souls. So we're going to walk it together tonight. We'll start with the story that Jesus tells in Luke 18. This is verses 9 through 14. It's short, but man, it is one of those stories that hits hard. Jesus says, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now pause there for just a second, because Jesus' listeners would have had a very different expectation hearing that opening line than we do today. To us, Pharisee is often stereotyped or shorthand for a hypocrite, usually overly so. But in Jesus' time, they were the spiritual masters. They were respected, they were educated, they were obedient. They were the people that you asked to pray at your wedding. They're the people that baptized your children. And tax collectors, they were scum. They were traitors. Think politicians funneling tax dollars from their own poverty-stricken constituents to line the pockets of the ultra-rich who were their bosses, and also themselves at the same time. So when Jesus says these 2 men went to pray, everyone already knows who the good guy is supposed to be. But then Jesus says the Pharisee stands off by himself, probably where everyone can see him, and starts praying. And he says, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of all I get. You could translate this as, God, thank you that I'm so awesome, not like this loser over here. He's praying like God has just handed him the Oscar for being the bestest little dude. And then the tax collector, reviled and rejected, seen as a traitor, says he won't even look up. He stands at a distance, face down, beats his chest and says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. There's no theology degree. It's no long-winded speech, just a raw cry for mercy. Sometimes the most powerful prayers we can pray are one sentence eked out through tears. And Jesus wraps up this very short story by dropping the hammer. He says, I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. If you were standing in the back of the temple watching both of these men pray, who would you think was closer to God? Jesus isn't just flipping expectations here. He's exposing something deeper. Humility is the difference between performing for God and actually honestly being with God. It's simple and clear and devastating. But humility gets a bad rap, right? Like it often sounds like low self-esteem, like we're supposed to downplay ourselves or think that we're worthless. But that's not at all what humility is. C.S. Lewis famously said it best, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Humility is not self-loathing. It's not about groveling or erasing yourself. It's about seeing yourself honestly, without filters or spin, and putting others first even when no one is watching. Jesus isn't calling us to hate ourselves. He's inviting us to live free from the exhausting pressure to always be impressive. And if we're honest, that pressure is everywhere. In our jobs, in our relationships, even in our faith. We want to look like we've got it all together. We want people to admire our insights and our generosity and our faith. But the truth is, you can be admired and still feel unknown. You can win the room and still lose your soul. Sometimes what we call humility is just a socially acceptable version of insecurity, right? We put ourselves down hoping someone else will lift us up. That's not humility. That's just your ego in disguise. Or here's another example. Some of us are masters of awkwardly dodging compliments. I still struggle with this. Someone will tell you that something that you did was beautiful. They say, that was beautiful. And our gut reaction is to immediately think, actually, it was terrible. You just don't know what you're talking about. That's not humility. That's just pride with makeup on. True humility is different. It's quiet strength. It's groundedness. It's the ability to walk into a room and not need to be the center of it, or the ability to walk into a room without even thinking about what others might be thinking of you, which sounds fantastic. It's the ability to truly know and be known by others without our egos getting in the way. Humility is actually an expression of what we talked about last week, if you were here, detachment. Healthy detachment doesn't mean apathy or disconnection. It means loosening your grip on the things that don't define you anyway. Your status, your image, your success. And humility is what detachment looks like when it starts working its way into our relationships. It's the fruit of a heart that is so secure in God's love, it no longer needs to be the center and is freed to truly love others. True humility is like a crystal clear mirror. It allows us to see ourselves and others as we actually are. No distortion, no filters. Pride is a warped mirror. It exaggerates or shrinks an image depending on what it needs in the moment. But humility reflects reality. It helps us see the inherent beauty and worth in ourselves and in every person we come in contact with. So let me ask you, where are you still trying to be impressive? Where does your ego feel the loudest? Where's God inviting you to rest in the truth that you are already loved, flaws and all, and that there's no performance required of you? Desert seasons have a way of stripping away what doesn't last, something we've been talking about, and that can be painful. Pride is a tricky prison determined to keep you held captive, but humility is what sets us free. We're going to widen the circle tonight and bring in a voice that we don't always hear. We've been looking at the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers, and tonight we're looking at a woman named Amma Syncletica. I should have practiced that a lot beforehand because I want to seem impressive. Amma Syncletica, one of the great desert mothers. She came from wealth, like serious wealth. She was educated, she was respected, she was from a prominent family in Macedonia. She could have lived a life of comfort and admiration. But when her parents died, she gave everything away. She moved into a small hut. She took on manual labor. She tended the sick. She taught other women who came to her, not with power or pretense, but with this quiet, steady humility that was honestly kind of startling. Here's some of her wisdom that gets me. This is a long-ish quote, which is going to be up on the screen, but if you get overwhelmed by that, just listen. I'm going to read the whole thing. One of her mentees once asked her, what does spiritual success look like? And Syncletica said, "It is dangerous for anyone to teach who has not first been trained in the practical life. For if someone who owns a ruined house receives guests there, he does them harm because of the dilapidation of his dwelling. It is the same for someone who has not first built an interior dwelling. He causes loss to those who come. By words, one may convert them to salvation, but by evil behavior, one injures them." You can't give what you haven't lived, is what she's saying. You can't serve others if you're still trying to impress them. If your inner life is a mess, it doesn't matter how externally impressive you've made yourself to be, you can't teach humility from a place of ego. In fact, if you do, you'll harm the very people you're trying to serve. That's the voice of someone who chose obscurity over recognition. Someone who believed that the hidden, ordinary life might be more holy than we think. Syncletica believed humility was the key not just to unlocking spiritual growth, but the key to our very salvation. She also said, just as one cannot build a ship unless one has sails, so it is impossible to be saved without humility. Jesus said, you can know who his followers are by their fruit, by the ways that they show up in the world. If humility isn't one of the fruits of our hearts, we're like a ship without sails, or a car without an engine, a hollow shell deprived of our core purpose. Alma Syncletica wasn't interested in being well known. She was interested in being faithful. She didn't measure herself by her platform or influence. She measured herself by how deeply she loved. And she did so with such an unassuming humility, which is so refreshing in a world or even in the church where everyone is building a brand. Humility is a terrible marketing strategy. It is a terrible, terrible publicity campaign. But it's far more real and powerful and impactful than any influencer hype that you could employ. Let's circle back to Jesus for a second, because I think this is where it kind of all comes together. In what is believed to be one of the earliest Christian hymns ever recorded, Philippians 2, verses 3 through 11, Paul writes this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. That's the setup, which is honestly pretty good on its own. But then he takes it to the next level and says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Some older translations say, being in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. I think that right there is enough to undo our entire cultural operating system. Because let's be honest, we're trained to cling. We're trained to grasp to our image, to our performance, to our control. Even in our spiritual lives, we try to manage our appearances, right? Look good, sound deep, be seen as mature. But not Jesus. He had every right to hold on to grasp, to cling to his status, and he let it go. Paul continues writing, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Let's just slow that down a little bit. He made himself nothing. It wasn't hidden power. It wasn't quiet prestige. It was nothing. Taking the very nature of a servant, the ground of all being, the king of the universe stooped down to wash feet. He was obedient to death, even death on a cross. Not just any death, the most humiliating, public, painful, dehumanizing death that the empire could devise. Jesus went low on purpose. Jesus went low on purpose. Imagine someone stepping down from a CEO position of a multi-billion-dollar organization to become a janitor. Not ripping on janitors, stay with me. Imagine someone doing this not as a stunt, but for love. And then imagine them being mocked and misunderstood and ridiculed and still showing up every day to clean up the messes that no one else wants to touch. That's the shape of Jesus' descent. Not for optics or sympathy, but out of pure love. That's not weakness. That's not foolishness. That's what true power looks like. That's humility. Jesus wasn't detached in a removed, emotionless way. He was detached in the most radical way. He let go of everything he could have clung to, everything he could have used to shield himself from pain or prove that he was right. And that freedom, his detachment from status and success and self-protection, is what allowed him to fully move toward us in love. What would you do if you had that kind of power? Honestly. I'd probably use it to avoid pain, not run toward it. I'd protect myself. I'd defend myself. I'd make sure that no one ever misunderstood me. I'd make sure that no one could ever hurt me or the people I love. But Jesus chooses vulnerability. He chooses the low place. And in doing so, he shows us that true strength is found in surrender. So if you're in a season right now when you feel small or invisible, if you're in a season when you feel like you're being emptied out, you might be closer to Jesus than you think. Now, all of that can sound very high and lofty, so let's bring it out of the clouds and down to the ground for a minute. Humility doesn't always look like some silent, monk-like lifestyle. It often looks like not needing the last word in an argument, admitting that you were wrong first, serving when no one notices, or letting someone else shine. And listen, like we all struggle with this. I certainly do. My ego wants to be liked. I want to be respected. I want to be admired. I want people to think I'm smart and I'm competent and I can say Syncletica without any problem. I want people to think that I'm kind and thoughtful and whatever else I think makes me valuable. This past week, Michaela and I were in a room full of pastors, and one of them was sincerely trying to be vulnerable, which is sometimes a really hard thing to do in front of other pastors. And I couldn't help but judge him. So I'm part of the problem. I couldn't help but judge him and think, that's not vulnerability, man. I'm glad I'm able to actually be vulnerable. And I might as well have said, God, thank you that I'm so awesome. Thank you so very much that I'm not like that tax collector over there. My ego just couldn't help itself. But man, the need to be impressive is just exhausting. It's a terrible guide through suffering because when life gets hard, your ego isn't going to save you. But humility can. And just to be clear, humility is not about being a doormat. It's not about erasing your voice or silencing your pain. It's not putting up with abuse or pretending that things are okay when they're not. True humility tells the truth, which means it still sets boundaries. It still says no when it needs to. Humility maintains and even insists on our inherent value, but it does so without needing to dominate and without needing to control. Humility can stand firm without posturing. Humility says, I don't have to prove anything. I just have to be faithful. I don't have to win. I just have to love. It is not weakness. It is anchored strength that reflects the truth. And this works in both ways. Let me explain what I mean by that. Counterintuitively, our pride can sometimes convince us that we're garbage, which can look like self-deprecation, rejecting compliments like we talked about, or acting like you have nothing to offer. We often think pride is puffing ourselves up, but in truth, it's any kind of self-perception dysmorphia, a distortion that either inflates or convinces us we're nothing. Real humility is grounded in knowing your true worth, your God-given value, and choosing to trust that above any of the self-perceptions that we're tempted to have or project out into the world. So you can know that you're gifted and you can still serve. You can accept a compliment without needing to turn it into a joke. You can be honest about what you carry and still not carry it like it's a crown or a curse. So here's the challenge for this week. Stay present in your thoughts and actions and notice where God is inviting you to walk in humility. Is it in how you speak to your significant other? Is it in how you respond to criticism? Is it in letting go of needing to be right all the time? Is it in being honest about your need for help? What would it look like for you to go low on purpose? To apologize first, to serve someone who can't do anything for you. Or maybe it looks like something quieter. Maybe humility this week means just receiving encouragement without deflecting it. Letting someone's words land. Saying, I really appreciate that instead of, oh, it was nothing. Because sometimes pride is the voice that says, you don't deserve that. But humility says, maybe this person knows more than me. Maybe God is trying to show me something true about who I am. You can practice this kind of humility in small, faithful ways. Pause before defending yourself in conversation. Ask a thoughtful question, and then actually listen. Let someone else lead. Let someone else lead, even when you could do better. Say thank you without explanation when someone affirms you. Going low on purpose doesn't always feel holy, but that's where transformation begins. You don't need to manufacture humility. You just need to stop resisting it. And if you're here tonight and this all feels a little abstract or maybe even a little suspicious, I get that. The idea of humility has been used to control people. It's been used to silence people. It's been used to keep people small. But that's not the kind of humility that Jesus modeled. His was the kind that lifted people up, the kind that freed people from the tyranny of pride. And that's the kind worth following. Because here's the promise: those who humble themselves will be exalted. And that exaltation doesn't always mean status or success. Often it doesn't. But it does mean being lifted by the love of God himself. And that is more than enough. So, as we keep walking through Lent together, don't be surprised if the desert continues unearthing things in you. Don't be surprised when you notice your ego this week. That's not failure. That's formation. God does some of his greatest work in these kind of desert seasons. You're not alone out there. And the one who walked low before us is still walking beside us now. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for your great love for us. Thank you that you love us so much that you have modeled for us the best way to live. In truth, in reality, in not needing to project who we think we need to be in order to be lovable. Thank you that you meet us first. You take the first step towards us and tell us that we are so loved, that you would be willing to do anything to show us that. God, may that soften our hearts. May that turn our hearts to you. And God, may we learn to not grasp the things that don't actually define us, to let go and to follow you humbly. May this be a place where we learn to do that together. We love you, God. It's in your name we pray. Amen.